advocacy on environmental and social issues. Take it away. Thank you.
Thank you. You go first, David.
Lovely to be with you. I think we might just sort of maybe make a few opening comments and then just sort of throw it open for discussion. So I'd like to sort of put forward three major points, I think, just to start off with, in terms of just the real politics, in terms of actually working with real live governments where we actually do have some leverage. So the first point, of truth, for want of a better term, is that if you want to get anything changed through the parliaments, you need to have one of the major parties support you. If you don't have one major party, you don't get anything done. And so much as it sometimes causes a bit of heartburn, the fact of the matter is that in both Victoria and New South Wales, that party is the Labor Party. Okay, because whether we like it or not, I think there is no prospect whatsoever of ever getting a Liberal or a coalition party to support our goals. Second thing is they actually happen to be in government. Okay, so if they're in government and they're the more likely, then that's our probable partner. And then I want to talk now about how problematic having them as a partner really is. The second thing, and perhaps it's a bit sort of in the myth-busting category, is that in both New South Wales and Victoria, Legalise Cannabis has what's quaintly referred to as the balance of power. And there's a perception that that's like a magic bullet. Oh, you've got the balance of power, just, you can fix this. I just want to make a few qualifiers about what balance of power actually means. The first one is that the balance of power is very fleeting. So about 2/3 of what goes through the Victorian Parliament, and I suspect probably similar in New South Wales, goes on the voices. It's never put to a vote. So you never actually get to exercise the balance of power in any meaningful way. The second one is often what you can exercise that balance of power on is limited. So in Victoria, the upper house can't consider budget bills. So people say to us, oh, why don't you just cut the fucking money off? That'll bring them to heel. Well, constitutionally, we're precluded from doing that. So that's kind of a downer. I was very disappointed because I didn't find out about that until after I was elected. The third thing is, particularly when you've got, moderately progressive government, the things where you get to exercise the balance of power are often things that you'd like to support. Because the reason your vote becomes critical is because the opposition is opposed to it. So when you say, oh, we're gonna screw the government on this bill, but it's about bail reform or about First Nations justice or women's rights, what are we saying? We're going to exercise the balance of power and we're going to screw these other people. So that's a third complicator. And then the other one that's just to bear in mind is, we can actually win a vote. If we get the opposition and the other crossbenchers, we can win in the upper house. But the reality is in the lower house, the government has a crushing majority. So even if we win in the upper house, it's a Pyrrhic victory because the government's just going to snuff it out in the lower house if they don't like it. And whilst there's a lot to be said for a glorious failure, it doesn't actually get any change. And that's what we're there for. We're there to get change, not be seen to lose heroically. Something that some people would say separates us from some of our progressive rivals, you could say, Jeremy. Not naming any names.
You could say that. I wouldn't possibly comment.
The third point I'd just like to make, is an old truism in the left. And that is that the price of a successful attack is a constructive alternative. If you don't want to support where the government's at or you want to force them somewhere, you've actually got to have a position that you can carry forward. And it was pretty interesting when we were putting together the bills that were simultaneously voted on in the New South Wales, Victorian and West Australian upper houses, because it was like, well, what do we agree on? And even on personal use, it was like, are we 2 plants per person, 6 plants, 10 plants? No, you're all sell-out bastards, it should be 20 plants. But if we don't actually have agreement within our own ranks how to do this stuff, you got bugger all chance of selling it to the government. And personal use is the easy one. That's our absolute priority. But personal use was the nice one. If you want to talk about the other side of the coin, commercialisation, You know, you've probably got 30 or 40 different international models to draw on, and some of them are really good, some of them are pretty bloody ordinary, and what's very clear is within LCV, and I suspect probably legalised cannabis generally, there is no correct position on what model of commercialisation we want. But clearly we have to establish that if we're going to successfully prosecute that with the government. So in that context, we need to recognise that we have to do business with Labor governments, and that's about the politics of the possible. It's not necessarily what you want, it's what you can get them to agree to. And you also need to recognise that we have a finite amount of political capital. So you can only get so many wins before they just piss you off. So it's balancing all of those things. So if I just try and wrap up by tying those together, to achieve change with Labor governments, first and foremost, you need to establish a relationship with them, because particularly when you're in a balance of power situation, you have to be across all the bills, and you have to vote with the government on most of them if you want to retain that partnership. And that has resource implications when you're a small party, and it also has political implications, because sometimes you go, well, I really prefer not to support this, but I know if I want government collaboration, then we're going to need to do a deal. It's also about alternatingly applying both leverage and love. So you can love them on some, and then you got to screw them on others, because if you just love them, they take you for granted. You just, pardon my French, but you just a cheap fuck, and they'll just take you for granted. Whereas you've got to be willing to belt them around the head. But obviously, if you belt them around the head too much and they suffer brain damage, well, they're not much good as a partner anymore. The third one is the ability to actually get down and negotiate an outcome. Yeah? Because it's not going to be necessarily what we want, and it's not going to be what they want, because what they want is they really prefer that we weren't there. You know? None of them are necessarily, in the Labor Party, are necessarily against cannabis reform. It's just they prefer not to do it, because it's full of risk, and it's things that they just, you know, let's talk about other things. So that's that one. And then the last one is just staying focused, because you've got to just keep hammering. And so in Victoria, and we'll be talking about this more tomorrow, but in Victoria, we're on random drug testing. You know, we'll be introducing a new bill for hemp in the next sitting week. But our focus absolutely is personal use. It's not commercialisation. It's personal use, because, you know, it's like you push on the wall and you push on the wall, and there's no clear way forward from these people who are far more experienced and far more resourced in terms of the other political parties. But you push on the wall until the cracks show, and we think the most likely crack to show will be on personal use. It's the hardest one for them to oppose. We know 80% of the population support it. We know that in Victoria about 10,000 people a year are arrested for personal use. That's where we're going to push. That's where we need to stay focused. And I'm hoping that in the next 12 to 18 months, that's where we'll get the breakthrough. So that's pretty much where we're at, and that's what working with the Labor government in Victoria is like. Yes, sir.
Oh, all right. What he said. There we go. I agree with everything that David has said. And I think it's really important, the point he was making about what Labor calls, when they consider us, they consider the Legalised Cannabis movement, and they consider the Legalised Cannabis Party, is organisational coherence. They like that we've got a political party that is coherent, is consistent, and has the same messaging, whether it's in WA, Victoria, Queensland, wherever we are, they are hearing the same thing. And David's absolutely right. That personal use, the fact that we've asked for a relatively modest change, which is like what we call the ACT plus model: 6 plants, share with friends, grow indoors, outdoors. It's a modest ask, but it's a considered one. It's based on, you know, decades of activist learning and what's achievable. And the Labor Party likes that they look at us and we say the same thing in different places. A lot of organisations don't do that. A lot of political parties don't do that. And so that gives them the confidence that we've, got our shit together and we're talking to each other, and we're not at risk of running off into other areas. The Labor Party, too, in my experience, is a very difficult beast because they are very transactional. Like they will not, it's almost an impossibility. They almost never support minor party bills. I think the Greens in 30 years in Parliament in New South Wales have had one bill passed. And there's a disinclination from the government to pass our bill. But we have to put pressure on them to pass our bill through their processes into law. But as David said, you've got this relationship where the stick you can use is one where you sort of have to do a bad thing, and it could be a bad thing like vote against a decent law, or there might be a procedural issue. A lot of the time we have procedural things at Parliament where you can throw some sand in the gears of the government there, because if you're not getting what you want, but there's a sort of cost, there's a moral cost in doing that. And my experience is the Labor Party is incredibly transactional, but demands loyalty. Like if you're against them on one thing, you're against them on everything. They really are. Like they've got a very strict internal disciplinary code, but effectively all their MPs are bound. All their MPs are routinely going in and voting against or for laws that they either support, that they internally don't want to, but that's the party position. They're always eating a shit sandwich for their party, and they expect us to chow down for a while too. And so there's a certain time that it is absolutely true. They're going, look, the way their party works is you suck it up for years and years, and then you get a result at the end. So we have to balance that up, and we're saying, look, there's an implied threat in some of the things we say and what we could do. Sometimes there's got to be an explicit threat, but you're always mindful that in the end, David's right. It's a Labor government that's going to bring about the rules, the change that we want, pressured by us. And so what are the levers you can use? Well, I've been talking a lot to the union movement, because the Labor Party is the union movement. Their policy platform is decided on the floor of their state and federal conferences. So making sure we're talking to people like the HSU, an affiliated union, second largest union in New South Wales, second largest affiliated union, in New South Wales to the Labor Party, and they write a lot of Labor Party policy. So working out how Labor makes their decisions is critical. Talking to those unions, getting them involved in the debate. So I've been talking to the HSU, the TWU, the PSA, big powerful unions, and saying, get involved in this issue in all its different facets, make submissions to our inquiry, and push internally in the Labor Party, both at their conference and when issues come up on the floor of Parliament. And then a lot of it too is building relationships, making sure that you build a dialogue, a constructive dialogue with the Labor Party around a whole range of issues. And so they're very keen to do that with us in New South Wales. They've been really glad-handing me recently. But I think the tone is going to change. We're a little bit behind Victoria. I think the tone will change soon, where we're going to have to say, look, what have you done for me lately? In New South Wales, the reality is they've supported our inquiry into cannabis, but they haven't done much. They haven't moved on RDT. We're getting soft-pedalled by the Transport Minister on that. They've kicked the can down the road on the drug summit, and they've bundled cannabis into that, which is a bit annoying. But we've got to be patient, allow that process which will run towards the end of this year to come to an end. And that's the point where we really have to muscle up and put some pressure on the government and say, you know, now we need some commitments from you on these things, or otherwise we're, you know, boycotting, or we're going to find opportunities where we're not going against our principles and, you know, vote for or against things that might be inconvenient to you, and, you know, then potentially, you know, campaign hard against them. Like, you know, at the state election, we could potentially run in places where it's inconvenient for them or, you know, good for them, and we can start making those, you know, those representations. They respect power, and they actually respect it when people exercise it. So, you know, that's the situation. It is a balancing act, and one I think we're handling quite well. I'm learning a lot from the Victorians because they are just, you know, they're just a few months, 6 months further down the road, but it's good to see how that model is evolving, and yeah, there's a lot to learn from that. So anyway, that's enough from me. Some questions, possibly?
I have a microphone for questions, so if you want to talk. Sorry, just fall down a hole. Here we go.
Hi, how are you guys?
Hello.
Francis from Perth. So how does the role of public opinion, what role does it play in this dance that you're playing with Labor? We feel like in Perth we can't get any media traction at all, like the media doesn't take us up. I've heard there's a blacklist on us or something, but how do you think Labor feels about public opinion towards personal use, for example, in terms of how it plays out in their strategy or their...
Yeah, it's a really good question, because I think after the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare household drug survey came out, which showed 80% of Australians believe it should not be a criminal offence, we thought, killer blow, you know, 80%. And we actually said to the Attorney General, you know, looking at your legislative agenda for the next 2.5 years, have you got anything on the horizon that's even close to having 80% public support? And of course the answer is no, not even close. But what they say is there's no votes in cannabis, because the people, you know, cannabis is traditionally a working class drug. You know, it's a drug of the socially marginalised, and as a result, they're people that mainly already vote Labor. And so what they weigh up is the risk associated with making a reform against will you actually get any fresh votes. And unfortunately, and I think they're wrong, they don't accord much weight to the fact that most Australians want it to be decriminalised, you know, in the face of all logic. And I think there was a wonderful book that had a title which was called The Deficit of Courage. And that's really what we've got. There's a real lack of courage, not willing to take risks, even when you get something as crushing as the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare report.
Yeah, and I think that is the position now, that the Labor governments, the Labor Party, think it's not a vote changer, but I think they're getting the news that they might be wrong. That in actual fact, my sense of it is that a lot of people, especially younger people, aren't as tribal and partisan in their political views. And it's been a long time since there's been a political party that was just an idea. So that, you know, we've got a life expectancy on us, you know, there's a use-by date, and that is when we legalise cannabis. Job done, really. You know, there might be some, you know, work to make sure it's administered and all the rest of it. But that's a big idea, you know, really progressive social reform that will change society. And a lot of people I think, switching on to the idea that they can go in and vote for an idea for the first time in a very long time. Legalise cannabis, it's all in the name, it means so much, and it's resonating across class, it's resonating across geography, and there's the working class recreational, I think, users of cannabis, but there's a massive cohort now of more affluent people who can afford medicinal cannabis, and those people are proselytising about it. They're going, I take this this vape, I take to have these drops, and it's saving my fucking life. You know, there's nothing more powerful than that. It's changed my life, it's saved my life. And those advocates out there are really powerful. When someone turns up at the Eleanor Golf Club and says, yeah, I'm on this THC vape, have a go of this, woo, bam, this will change the golf, the golf score. You know, that really makes a difference. And they're seeing it turn up, and I think that they are. I think that David's right that at the moment they think it's not as significant, but I think in time they'll realise that it's only going to grow. The one caveat I would have on that is that there's a possibility that Labor strategists would go, well, let's not solve this problem now because it's quite handy having the Legalise Cannabis Party around, and that's something we need to be mindful of, that we, it's great that we're electing people and we hope to elect a senator and more people everywhere, but that has to turn into a result. And especially as we move into the Victorian and New South Wales state elections in the next 2 to 3 years, then that's where we really want to see a result. We have to tell Labor, that we're not going to be lapdogs or just, you can just string us along forever.
Thanks, guys. You're both very, very great spokesmen to represent the cause. I'm amazed how good you guys are doing. But I think the biggest thing I'd like to say is the social media game is the key to the most success for the amount of input. The big parties are very bad at social media. It's a huge weak point. They've got a lot of money, but they've got no brains. So we need to be able to exploit that, I think, is probably the biggest thing. And just totally agree with your last point about time. I feel like the party's at a point that it needs to just grind as the awareness and the perception changes. And there's nothing you can do to make that happen much faster than it is already. It's just about, once we reach this point, I think it'll all become very clear very quick. And the commercialisation issue, to me, the biggest thing is tax. We're going to argue forever about this and that with the commercialisation. The government is never not listening when you're talking about increasing their tax base.
Yeah, that's a really good point. They're really cognizant of it. I've talked to the Treasurer. I know my colleagues in Victoria talk to Rachel and David talk to their Treasurer all the time. Never get between a politician and a bucket of money. But there's the mechanics of it in terms of our constitution in Australia make it difficult. You can't put an excise on cannabis at a state level. So that's a massive disincentive. The states regulate it, but they don't tax it. And the feds don't want to regulate it and therefore don't want to tax it either. And so it's finding novel ways around that with our model is going to be a real challenge for us because each state's actually a little bit different too. So making sure we have that coherence with what our commercial model might look like is going to be is really important. And on your point on social media, look, help me. I've got like 240 what do you call them? Followers on Instagram, so that's not a bad start. That's good, isn't it? Is that good or is that bad? I don't know.
How many when you take out family members?
We take out family members and trolls. It's like 25. It is. But what's interesting is that there's a huge community. It's not just Legalise Cannabis. There's a huge community of cannabis advocates, and they're clever. They're articulate. They're saying all these things, from sort of intersectional issues around social justice and race and that relate to cannabis, and then women's issues, and then there's also people, working in, biomedicine, which is just, my brain's not that big, to deal with what's happening in, pharmacology and medicine and then the hemp space as well. So I'm not so worried about that because so many people are making those arguments, out there in social media. and we all benefit from it.
Question here?
Sure.
Oh, I was just going to say the same thing, like surely, and from a politician's standpoint, the biggest thing would be the money you can make from it. So like how are they ignoring the fact that they could be making billions in tax and also taking millions away from the like criminal or the black market that they'd be taking it from? Surely that would be like either side of any government would be happy to make that by
Yeah, I guess, there's a couple of points there. One is a very inconvenient truth, which is the Constitution. And Section 94 of the Constitution basically deprives the state of the ability to tax. So they can cost recover, but they can't make money. But now we've got one of the beauties of being in Parliament is you actually get access to people that can do research that you could never dream of. We've got a paper that will be coming out in the next week, which basically says that if the state does an agreement with the Commonwealth and they do a basic commercialisation model, they can pull in somewhere around $2 billion over 5 years. To my mind, in my humble opinion, like $2 billion is a lot of money. However, in the state of Victoria, the Treasurer currently owes $177 billion. So for them, $2 billion is like a rounding error. Now, that doesn't mean, I guess the thing is though, if we're talking about a reform, normally governments say, oh, reform, it's just going to cost us money. And the reality is that legalising cannabis won't cost them money. They will make money, so that sort of undermines that argument. But it's certainly not the sort of magic bullet you'd like to imagine. Likewise, if you're trying to quantify the cost savings through it no longer being a criminal offence, so reducing police involvement, the courts and whatever, it's really depressing trying to pull the numbers together because they just don't come out that big. Most people, when they go to court on cannabis charges, actually have another related charge. So it's not just standalone. Cops, on any shift, there'll be 5,000 cops on duty on a day, whether they're doing domestic violence or they're doing weed. The fact of the matter is that in Victoria they're doing 9,000 to 10,000 arrests every year. The fact of the matter is the police just redeploy across it, so you can't document any savings. So we know it's the right thing to do. We know that there will be savings. We know that there will be revenue for the government. But to try and get any sort of gee whiz killer death blow, very difficult.
Well, it's great. We could chat on all afternoon, but we have time for one more question.
Hello, fellows.
Hello.
Good job, thank you, David and Jeremy. This is John, the Wombat. Okay, go back to 1979. The Royal Commission in South Australia recommended not to criminalise cannabis. They were voted out by the Labor Party. Nothing happened in 1987. Okay, then they decriminalised the personal use on 10 plants. Okay. What happened was within about 2 years, Adelaide was the centre of hydroponic cannabis production in Australia. It was shipping to Western Australia, Queensland, all sorts of stuff. In terms of fundamental problems and building an argument, the argument for personal use is fantastic. But it doesn't matter which part of the government you talk to, the health department, the police department, there's this perception that unless you have some form of legal sales to counteract that, people are going to grow it and sell it illegally, That's what they're worried about. I'm not. I think it's great. I think we should do it tomorrow. But in terms of structuring like how we go about it, I agree that having personal use and then moving to some form of sales is logical. But how do governments respond? Like in Adelaide, they eventually cancelled it, went back down to one plant, and you have to hand in your ID if you go and buy a box of fertiliser from the hydroponic shop. Like they came down on it. So my question is, how does the structure fit that? How can you respond to their argument against? Thank you.
It's a really good question, and in the context of what we're talking about, Labor and how they think, I asked the Premier Chris Minns, we have a thing called budget estimates, about where you go every 6 months, you get to bring in the ministers and the Premier and ask them, 1,001 questions. And the question I put to the Premier, who wrote an op-ed in 2018, who wrote an opinion piece calling for the end of prohibition, calling for full legalisation, made all our arguments when he was a shadow minister. I said to him, you know, what's changed, Chris? And what he said, well, we've got legalisation. He said, his attitude was medicinal cannabis and the prescription model, regulated federally, was legalisation. If you want it, you can get it. And I was saying to him, well, not if you can't afford it, and which was, I think, a point that he acknowledged. So that's what we have to do. That, like, this is their view. They essentially think that the commercial model is there, that the medicinal cannabis regime will flip over into an adult use commercial model. That's how they'll see it. Whether or not it continues to be through doctors and you know, we'll see. But you know, they might down schedule the cannabis and it won't need to be. But that's how they see it. And the bit of the puzzle that we can bring to them is our personal use bill. We can say, well, yeah, that's great for people who can afford to spend $190 for, you know, for 10 grams of skunk that'll, you know, blow your eyebrows off, or I want to just grow my own buds. You know, what's wrong with that? So yeah, that's what I said to the Premier. Why can't we just grow our own buds, man? And pretty much.
Is that when he said stop bogarting the choice?
Yeah, then he said, yeah. But so that's essentially it. So the question is a good one, and we look at it through what they've said. They think that the legalisation model is there. We say, well, that's not right, that's not fair, and we need to make sure that we look after everyone and bring in this personal use model. A big deal has been actually the flip over in Germany. You know, like the one thing with the US is it's full of people like Donald Trump. You know, like, do you want to follow with everything the US does? So there's a bit of reluctance there, and no one sort of knows what's happening in Canada. You know, it's like when you say, yeah, it's Canada's legalised, they go, oh, well, I don't know what's happening. They're reviewing, but and in the US, well, everyone's like, well, there's 30 different models there, or 35 different models there. But Germany, you know, that's a pretty sober, responsible. You know, they get a lot of things right in Germany when it comes to social policies and economic policies. And the fact that they have basically adopted the Legalised Cannabis Party's model on, you know, personal adult use. And the argument they made there was about the Green Party, the cannabis advocates made there was about smashing crime. They used a law and order. They said this will hurt organised crime. And that was really effective, and they brought in that personal use model. And yeah, so that's I think the pathway for us.
Yeah, time to finish up, but I just want to say we keep it simple, we keep it focused, and we apply alternate love and pressure on our respective Labor governments so that they can't dilly-dally too much. And there will be difficult decisions along the way. There will be things where we will probably have to compromise what we personally might prefer in terms of what the governments want, but that will be the price of getting this through. And that's really the road that we have to pursue. And so we intend to do that, don't we, Jeremy?
Yes.
Oh, thank you very much.
There ends the sermon.
Thank you very much. A big MardiGrass thank you to Jeremy and David.
Thank you, David.
Insights and sharing your wisdom. This is obviously a conversation that can just go on for hours. So if you see Jeremy and David lurking around, maybe have a chat to them. Sorry. Next up, we have